I'll start tonight's proceeding with a karakia. Kia tau te rangamarie ki tātou katoa. Ka piki te kaha, ka piki te oro, ka piki te maramatanga, haumie, huie, paikie. I, like Nina said, I'm a founding member of the artist advocacy group, Artists Makers Aotearoa, or AMA, which we're a community of makers for makers that advocates for the arts by voicing shared concerns to make a positive change. I am Richard Orgis, he, him, they. I'm from Tamaki Makaurau. I'm a Pākehā artist, curator, educator, and activist for broader queer representation. So once a teacher, always a teacher. I will ask the panelists to politely introduce themselves, and also just as a bit of an icebreaker, if you could choose one word to end it that describes the current state of the art world in Aotearoa. Let's do this alphabetically. We'll go from Evan to Jasmine, Melissa, and Tendai. So I'll pass the mic over to you, Evan. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. My name is Evan Woodruff. I'm an artist based in Tamaki Makaurau and working across Asia Pacific. I run Aotearoa Street Studios, providing permanent workspace for artists since 2008. And I'm an advocate for the arts through my past work with the Artists Alliance, as a collector, a teacher, and through my community involvement. One word: exciting.
And we'll pass it to you next, Jasmine.
Kia ora, my name is Jasmine Salazaria. I'm Samoan, born and raised, and I'm now based in West Auckland. And I'm an artist. I work with tapa, so bark cloth. And in terms of facilitation, community work, I work a lot with a lot of young artists and community creatives, just emerging artists and students as well, through uni and just through making friends outside of art. But yeah, a word, I was gonna use exciting, but I'll just say hopeful. I'm looking forward to all the things, so really hopeful.
Kia ora, my name's Melissa. I am also based in Tamaki Makaurau. I think we all are. And I'm an artist, a curator, a writer, and a community worker. I range from sculpture and performance work to supporting community organizations to do the arts. And I am actually going with upheaval.
Kia ora, Melissa. Tendai, you're next.
Kia ora, everyone. First of all, thank you to Nina, Amy, and Richard, and everyone else for organising this panel and for the kind invitation. My name is Tendai, I'm Mutambu, pronouns he, him, or they, theirs. I am a dark-skinned African New Zealander, and I'm wearing a green bucket hat with mid-length black hair peeking out from the back. I have on a pair of spectacles with a thin gold wire frame and a green polo shirt. I also have a bookshelf behind me. I am joining this panel as a member of DAM, or Dignity and Money Now, and we're a group of artists, activists, and cultural sector workers who are insisting that our communities, our arts communities, be they trained, untrained, professional, semi-professional, be valued for their contributions they make to society. And as our name suggests, we want our people to be treated with dignity and we want our people to be paid. As you'd assume, I'm a cultural sector worker, a writer, editor, and currently a curator at Te Uru Waitakere Contemporary out west in West Auckland.
Perfect. Kia ora. Just a little reminder that if you have questions to ask the panel, please put them in the chat function and we will come to those at the end of the discussion. I might keep that ball rolling. The first question we have, and I might direct it to you, Tendai, just because you're on a flow. What do we want and how do we get it? What do we want and need for the art world and how might we work towards it?
What do we want and how do we get it? I mean, also my one word was like interval, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're in this interval between an old world and a new one. And we're sort of yet to figure out what we want this new one to look like, which maybe ties into this question of what we want. I think the reason that DAM, Dignity Money Now, started was because we wanted to get several people together from different areas within the arts, not just the visual arts, for example, which is the area that I'm often involved with. We wanted to hear what was going on in all those different areas and what kind of vision for a more equitable future looked like from all those different vantage points. And I think the basic thing is to first of all sketch out a space in which we have an expansive definition of what an artist is, and it goes beyond just the kind of, you know, those legitimized by an art school training or like, you know, some prestigious institution. And we wanted to include as many people as we can, and we wanted to represent as many people as we can. So, and I think the first step is to have all those constituencies in the conversation, and then we can figure out what we want to see, the world we want, what we want it to look like together, collectively.
How have you found it working across the disciplines?
It's very early days. So DAM was initiated in its early stages around mid-year last year, or at least that's when I kind of joined the mix, and we've only just sort of gone live with our socials, as some of you will have seen, earlier this year. And so far it's a very small cohort of us who are working on it, although we were looking to expand, and it's gone incredibly well. For me, it's been really eye-opening and quite refreshing to connect with people from other disciplines, to sort of expand that conversation a bit more than it usually goes, at least from my experience in the past.
I was wondering, Jasmine, does that resonate with you in terms of your work with emerging artists? The sort of notion of maybe an optimism about rebuilding the art world?
Yeah, for sure. I think when I was hearing you speak, Tindai, I think of just put some keywords down, like acknowledgement and the reframing of artists. Like there's a lot of categories of what we can do and what we can provide to what's relevant right now and to other fields as well. Yeah, I think so. Reframing of those, of the word artist or creative industries in a more open and like less intimidating way. And yeah, so we can approach it that way. And also acknowledgements, I think, into that role of reframing, we acknowledge that there's different people, different backgrounds, all with different skill sets and just intentions of how to create and present or be creatively. And I think, yeah, it talks a lot about what the themes that you're talking about, Tindai. So yeah, I think that's what I can add on to that question.
Yeah, I mean, Jasmine, did you ever think about specifics that you and your community need right now and how we might move towards that?
Yeah, so I can speak on the cross-crit. So cross-critique is an initiative that my best friend and I from university created out of wanting to reach out to other creatives that is not just fine artists, and also to like make friends and have this ongoing conversation about where our art is and where it could go and how we could help each other improve and just collaborate more. And so cross critiques has, I think, the kind of the issue that we faced during our studies was that we didn't feel like we had a space to get the feedback that we wanted in our art practices, specifically like different social and cultural feedback. So I think from that, we reached out to the community and everyone's so generous in terms of space. So I think space was a need. And also, I think it's every artist thing where we just like want money to make things happen and resources in the nicest way possible, but not really, I think, those were the things that came up initiating that project for the students and our friends, and yeah, trying to connect all those creatives together.
Who's offering space at the moment in the real estate crisis?
So when we first started, 312 Hub generously gave us the space, Tautai organization, and I'm forgetting other spaces, but there was a lot of people that were like kindly offering their spaces. There's a few spaces on K Road as well, which was really like, I think it was less stressful for us as artists to like, kind of put up application when we got the community. Yeah.
And did that, in that terms of the initial need when you were at art school, does it talk to needing a different type of education system as well?
Yeah, for sure. I was part of a Tuakana cohort, and that caters to Māori and Pacific students at Elam. And there's this tuakana and tuakana teina relationship, which we all felt comfortable like sharing. It wasn't like a student mentor, but more of like a equal ground conversation where there's no hierarchies, where we can all come in different knowledge, different experience, and we can all share without feeling stressed about like, oh, this person might be smarter than me kind of thing. So I think tuakana program really helped frame those the cross-crits like framework outside of institution. So we wanted to bring that outside and see how we could do it without institutions, and more openly, and things that could cater to our needs as artists and collaborators as well.
Yeah, I definitely think in this time of limited time resources and financial resources, it does seem, as we consider reinventing the art world, we really do need to reinvent arts education and what that might look like as well. So I think that talks to that. I was also thinking, Evan, there's nice crossovers with what you do in terms of studio spaces. And if you might talk a little bit about that, but also what sort of art world would you like and how might we achieve it?
I think, what sort of art world would I like? I think what we all want is more visibility. I think the actual visual art community is very strong and supportive in Aotearoa, but does seem to operate on the fringe of society. And I don't know, do we put ourselves on the fringe even, perhaps? But there needs to be more sort of dialogue between the visual arts and wider sectors of society, not just different disciplines, which is fantastic to hear about DAM, which is involving the different disciplines, and but also with different industries, so that there's more of a recognition or a meshing of visual arts into our wider culture or our wider community, really, which is what you see overseas. I think we have to remember that we are still a very young nation, and this cultural maturity, or this engagement with culture, and this realization that culture is beneficial to us and is something that is a great part of humanity. We hear about all of the shit parts of humanity through the media, but culture is sort of a shining beacon, and so we need that more than ever. That needs to be incorporated more into industry. But then we have it's great to hear about rebuilding the art world and the tropes that have been sort of promulgated through art schools, where you can't talk about how to forge your way ahead in the art world. There are so many different and all equally valid pathways for visual arts to take, but where's the map? Nobody's telling you different ways of negotiating the art world. There needs to be some sort of professional development being at least acknowledged, if not taught, at art schools. It's always like trying to make money to put food on the table for your family through your profession, that's a dirty thing. I like to divide my brain into two different places. I work in the studio, and when I work in the studio, it's purely a creative process. But then outside of the studio, that's when if the art wants to survive out in the community, that's where I have to engage with the community as an artist, and sort of, you got to wave your flag around, because otherwise you don't get any notice. As far as spaces go, obviously Auckland's very expensive, but it is good to see new artist-run spaces setting up. And Jasmine, I'm looking forward to seeing your curation down the road at Oddly tomorrow, where I meet Lexi for coffee. So Oddly's a new artist-run space in Dominion Road. I think that's the cross-crit session happening there. I manage Aotearoa Street Studios, which is about 220 square meter space. We have 13 artists in there. Some have been there. I've been there since the beginning, but some are, some people stay, some people go. So there's a little bit of flux. It's not cheap, but it's not expensive. And I think artists do have to realize that, they're going to be up for $65 a week for a space. And just to give people an idea, $65 a week gets you a space 2.5 by 4.5 meters, so 10 square meters or so, which isn't big, but it's big enough. And I think it makes you prioritize being in that space, making in that space, interacting with the other people in that space, preparing a space where you can invite people to show your works, collaborating with others in the space. So it is a cost, but it's a cost. Otherwise you work at home, but then you have no collaboration, you have no separated space, you have no compunction to have to go there often to make it pay $1 per hour.
Cool. Kia ora, Evan. I was thinking also about Tendai, about how you've spent this time in terms of dams defining what an artist might be, and how that actually might shake a lot of feathers in terms of thinking about art, because in a way we're surrounded by creative endeavors. People talked about lockdown. The only way people survived was through, Spotify and Netflix. And so is your definition of art, how expansive will you be with that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think that's one of the things we've posted recently on our Instagram, is that, all around us, we're surrounded by artists of different kinds contributing in both direct and indirect ways to the culture. And of course, if we want to imagine a world in which they don't exist or they stop making work, it'd be a pretty impoverished place to live, spiritually, culturally, visually, and the list goes on. I think our impetus for wanting to expand the definition of artist came from the fact that so many of the people who are adversely affected, or most adversely affected by the current situation brought on by the pandemic, are people who don't have necessarily, well, they don't necessarily have formal art school training. They don't even consider themselves to be people who should be part of the conversation when we start having these little sort of internecine kind of insular arguments about, which artist's work is selling the most at auction and whatnot and whatever else, which I think those are really important conversations to have. But I want us to expand beyond, a handful of art schools across the country that churn out a bunch of grads who then have to sort of compete for shows in a handful of institutions across the country. We want to show that there is more, this possibility beyond that, first of all, and that our arts ecology is the richer for having more diverse voices who can come through different parts of creative learning and doing, and can contribute just as much as anyone else, really. So I think that was sort of the starting point for us, is that inclusivity. And then we also see a lot of minority groups coming through different ways of learning, self-taught, taught through their own kind of informal communities. And we want to give that a space within the conversation. And to think that we don't have to funnel all our needs through the tiny aperture of like a centralized funding body where you're made to sort of bend over backwards and beg to some mid-level bureaucrats who don't actually understand the nature of your art form, who don't speak your language, who don't make the effort to speak your language. So that's where we came from, I think.
Yeah, it does take me back to this idea of arts education, and the marker of success is if you put objects in a white box and you somehow sustain a career out of that, when of course we know that the creative sector is huge and varied, and people, it's this old thing where I feel that maybe less than 1% of art school graduates will actually reach or have that type of career. And then what are we giving all of those other people? We setting them up for a sense of failure. But of course they add to the culture in a multiple of ways. Like it's a very good grounding in terms of looking at the world and forming connections and so forth. But I do think the impetus is on the art schools to kind of break that up. Because it's very aware that people will go to a tertiary institution and they'll be told, okay, these are the mediums you work with, these are the galleries you'll look at, everything else will not be considered. And I just think the damage they're doing, but also in terms of a product they're offering, it makes it so much easier if there's only one outcome, And I think there's a lot of pushback from students that I'm seeing asking for different representation on staff. That's really pushing against this notion of art school in the institution and it being a business model and not being able to offer what students are asking for at the moment in terms of diversity, representation, different types of art forms. Melissa, I might pass it to you in terms of your vision of what the art world needs and how we might get there.
So yeah, I kind of want to respond to some of the themes that have been coming out that have been talking about it. And when you first invited me on this panel, I started thinking about Pierre Bourdieu's classic field of practice model. This idea that there is not one single thing, but a visual arts exists in a field of practice that is large. And the field of practice goes everything from a hobby craft through to a professionalized person. It goes everything from an incredibly accessible Hollywood film through to an experimental film. And that field of practice is constantly in contention with itself as to what is dominant, what is currently considered to have value. But I think the bigger thing that we should be arguing for, and what I think I'm hearing Tendai and Jasmine and even Evan saying, is that we need to be arguing for the whole field. And if we uplift the whole field of practice and we argue for the value of the whole field of practice, from those who do art as a sense of self-fulfillment to those who do it as a means of income to everything, and we're actually saying, no, pay everybody properly and pay everybody with dignity. And then we expand beyond that and we actually say, why are we only advocating for the arts? Obviously, we're advocating for the arts because you need to grasp onto something. But the bigger question is also, how do people in society live with dignity? And if people live with dignity in society, then they have time and space to be able to be creative. And so it's that baseline beyond subsistence, being able to live with dignity, be able to have the time. And Jasmine, I thought it was really interesting when you said you were talking about needing time and needing space. And well, actually money and space. But I remember 1998, I got interviewed, what do brand new grads need out of art school by a New Zealand Herald journalist. And I was very naive and I thought they were going to quote exactly what I said. And they said, what do artists need? And I said, we need time and we need space. And they said, oh, you mean money? And I said, no, we need time and we need space. How you get that time and space, everybody's going to do it differently, but you need to be able to not be working all the time. And you need to be able to have spaces that support making whatever your making is. And then you can be creative and you can start to thrive in those means. Whatever your end goal is, whatever your creative end goal is, whether you want to end up at the Auckland Art Gallery, you want to end up at Q Theatre or in Hollywood, or you want to give a really beautiful gift to your mother, whatever, you need the time and space. Melissa thinks artists need money. That was the quote.
Melissa, how do we do that? How, in your opinion, do we work towards that? Is it universal basic income? Is it something different?
I think that is one of the strong arguments. I think basically, I mean, total societal teardown is the extreme option, but I'm not necessarily arguing for that. But we have gone to this. We're going back to the 1920s. We've gone to this point of income inequality, of opportunity inequality, which is so extreme that we need to rebalance that. And in the 1950s, post-war in England, they introduced the arts councils, and suddenly they were actually funding a whole load of arts. And before that, we didn't have that. And then they rolled out that model for the rest of the Commonwealth because Commonwealth. But again, we do have that opportunity to go, hey, what is if we're having a big societal upheaval, and we're saying we've lived through this, what are we as a society demanding changes? I think we need to think bigger than the arts as well as for the arts, like dignity for people, dignity for artists, and uplifting the whole field. But it's like it's a big wicked problem. So we're all going to have different corners of it to weave together, and DAM and artists. I've totally blanked. AMA. I just kind of want to say, ask me anything. But yeah, I think that it is. We actually got to a point though where we're challenging the hegemony of only the professionalized arts in a really productive way, and I think that is what makes me optimistic. That we're no longer just saying, hey, there is only one art world, and we're aiming for that thing.
I mean, it's so fascinating, because then automatically in my mind it just expands and expands and expands, and I'm like, what do I grasp onto it? Like, as one person or a small collective, what can I do? And I agree with you, like, it needs to be a societal shift, but where do we begin? Maybe I'll pass it. Oh yeah, you go, Melissa.
No, I was just going to say something. You kind of, it's that classic, you begin with what is in front of you and you keep moving. But yeah,
which is why I ended up in DAM, really, is because, I mean, how do I find myself in this, or how have I found myself in this corner of the cultural sector, for want of a better term? This is sort of what's immediate to me when I'm, if I'm working with technicians or with artists, and then I have to look them in the face and confront the fact of their worth, the value of their labor. That's, to me, is the immediate thing. That, and I could be doing a million other things, but that's sort of, you start there, I suppose, as Melissa's saying.
Have you, I know that it's a fledgling organization, have you decided on what comes first in terms of action?
We haven't quite really. At the moment, we're working on our manifesto, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, the good old manifesto.
I love them.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
Exactly. So that should be out in the next month or so. And then the next step for us is then to start bringing in more people and make sure that different constituencies are represented within that, in terms of, disability and different identity groups and so on, to make sure that when we have that conversation, that people are represented within that. So I think that's sort of the sort of basis of where we're starting, in getting a feel for, the general temperature where people are at this current moment. Within our immediate communities, the current members represent several different communities throughout Aotearoa and Tamaki Makaurau. And then, we bring more people in, and then we see what we need to do next. And I mean, of course, there are hurdles with this, with the current situation. A lot of what we wanted to do was to meet in person and hold hui and talks and, lectures and performances and things, just to get people's morale up and have them sharing space and energy and having those discussions. But we'll always find a way. I think we'll find a way to make it happen, because we have to.
I was really interested in the last panel discussion where Evan talked about his musical career, and I had to take it back to this visual arts, and I look at the world with a certain lens, a certain bias for the visual arts, but I look at other art forms, and I look at APRA, I look at writers' guilds, I look at actors' equity, and I see a history of collectivization that hasn't been apparent in the visual arts. And I wonder if part of it's the way we're trained. I wonder if it's these romantic notions of the artist alone in the studio. I wonder if it's that our art forms don't bring people together in the same way theatre does in terms of a collective art form. And maybe I've got another question. I'll maybe come back to the other one, but the third question was about collectivization and individualism. And does society have a duty to support the arts, especially if certain communities have historically been underserved by arts institutions? What are the responsibilities of the arts to society? Jasmine, I might pass that to you if you don't mind. Do you have any feedback in terms of collectivization and a responsibility of the arts to society, since the nature of the arts landscape is dependent on government, central and local government for survival, and I wonder if there's needs to be a reciprocal relationship in the ways that we think about production.
I can respond to the just the first part of the question, which is around like the societal role in like the arts. I just like had this thought that I don't think people know that they're like subconsciously like adding into our art without, especially with like, I hate to speak about COVID, but like COVID, and we've all looked into like arts and like creative things to deal with, and like, and I think in that way, there is a huge responsibility for like our society to acknowledge that and bring those forth and kind of have a way to maybe like it's still like in my head, like conversation in my head, but like a way to like put out those avenues to connect the arts and like the people. And I've kind of seeing it. I'm kind of seeing it around now with like posters and all these things that are really interactive, which is really cool. But if you guys don't mind, I can come back to the question, but that's the initial thought that it came to mind.
Thanks, Jasmine. Melissa, did you have any input into that in terms of a reciprocal relationship between arts and the larger society?
Yeah, I think, and I think it's kind of actually really tricky doing it in the context of this talk because we're sort of talking from the space of an arts organization, which is effectively equivalent to university researchers, or to that if you think about in the larger field, we're at the end that is doing a lot of the esoteric stuff, which then gets filtered down into other things. And so there's a kind of sense of often we're making work to talk to ourselves. We're making work to talk to other artists. And then the question then becomes like, how do you make, not that you should simplify the work, but how do you provide access points into this kind of work that don't require people to have spent a lot of time gaining specialized knowledge? So how do we scaffold people into engaging with practices? Just the same as if I look at a very complex weaving from a specific culture, all I see is it pretty or not? Is it well made or not? Because I do not possess those sets of knowledges to know what the various dialogues and symbols are. You think about the exhibition down at the City Gallery right now, they had to kind of publish a really extensive glossary to Hilma af Klint's personal language so that people could go beyond looking at it and going, yeah, that's pretty. And I'll have to admit, I didn't read the glossary and I went, yeah, that's pretty. And I actually also think we need to be kind of going, that's okay. It's okay to engage with art just on the pure response of, does it, do I have a kind of affect response to it? Is it pretty? Does it make me feel good? Does it make me feel happy? Is it, and so I think like the arts for art's sake is kind of over here, and then we have all that kind of things people don't like to talk about, the kind of instrumentalized or arts with the utility, and the particular world most of us professionally operate in is uncomfortable with the utility of arts. So I think we basically just need to get over ourselves a little bit and understand that. And I think what's really makes me really optimistic is we have been going through a process of getting over ourselves. Not necessarily everybody, but a lot of us have been going through a process of kind of going, yeah, there's different ways and different places for different types of work, and they all have value. But then I think I kind of feel like I've diverged completely from the question of how do we kind of collectivize and connect. I think it's also then how are you inviting creative practice from other people back into the space? How are you engendering that dialogue? And yeah.
Because Evan, I feel like you'd be, well placed to sort of respond to that in terms of stepping outside and looking at, larger audiences.
Yeah, I mean, the audience is a tricky one. I don't think we should dumb them down. I don't think artists are at the pointy end of the field, at the well manicured end of the field, because artists are the authors. So of course they're going to exist in a place of more specialist knowledge than the audience ever will. But the audience is very broad. I mean, the audience itself, say society, encompasses not just the author, but our nemesis, the large amount of people in some pockets who fight against the arts. And I could point out our own Auckland Art Gallery, where the money was, the funding for that was whittled down year on year since the formation of the Super City, to reach its nadir in 2017, where they looked like they might even have to close, through to Tauranga Art Gallery, being fought tooth and claw by the locals there not to have any money going into that, not for it to be established, through to the Huntavasa in Whangarei, which took 20 years of quite vicious battles to get that established and finally opened. But of course, then there's a middle ground, which artists have to engage with all, don't we? We have to engage with the ones who are viciously anti-art, and we have to engage also with the people who are looking for their imaginations to be stimulated with. But I think many artists and art institutions work hard in the community to communicate the benefits of a life with art. We go into schools and we talk to students, we talk to teachers. And I think actually what Jasmine, you said earlier about friends, that's where it begins. Our biggest, our most important audience is our whānau and friends, and they're our fan base. And from that, we can build on. And it is about building a community. So an artist, there's that work in the studio that they have to do, but then there's the building of the community, which is relationship building, talking, dialogues, friendships, and all of that. And the people that I've met here and overseas who have been serious collectors are people who are deeply involved in all of the arts, and deeply interested in the growth of culture. I mean, it gets rarefied because you're dealing with people who have more privilege through money and things than we can almost comprehend. But there are large swathes of it. It's not just. I did a show for the Auckland Triennial at the Auckland Art Gallery back in 2013, where we gave away art to the masses, and the biggest group, we had people queued out of the gallery to receive these anonymous artworks wrapped in brown paper that were donated by various artists. No trace of who actually made each one. But I talked with one young man from Manukau who had come all the way in. He said, "I can't afford art, and here I've got this piece of art for free. This is amazing. I feel like it's Christmas." And I think a lot of people, they want in. It's up to the artists not to make it accessible, like Melissa mentioned. Not to mention it being dumbed down, but I think a lot of people are receptive, and more people are becoming more and more receptive as more of the artists and more of those hundreds of art school graduates every year go out into the community and do their thing.
Tendai, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I realized something that might sort of synthesize some of these loose threads that I had floating in my mind. Is this the question of class, really? And Andrew Tui, who's in the comments, just asked something that sort of prompted that in me. And the question is about how can we explore the connections and benefits of a diverse arts culture if people cannot earn a living creating? How can the public be encouraged to get off the couch, let alone pay for the experience? And I think sometimes we can put too great an emphasis on the division between art and non-art people. I mean, some people happen to be in the art world as sort of custodial staff or front of house or whatever else, and they probably have more in common with people who are outside of the art world, as if we trace it along class lines. You know, so I think the conversation really is one that is a distinction of like a material, you know, like what's the material basis of your involvement in the arts in a way. And I think that sort of clarifies things a little bit more. And one of the things that I guess I wanted to think about was this point you raised, Evan, about this, you know, whether the artist is or isn't at the sort of pointy end of the affairs, intellectually, conceptually, and so on. And for me, this is when sort of art schools have become the main culprit, in as much as so much of the art that's successful requires a great deal of conceptual acumen, or like, you know, a kind of level of, you know, theoretical and literary prowess that affords, that's the kind of thing you trade off, really. So it might not be that the artists are making work that's necessarily made to be elitist or inaccessible in a way, but we have a system that really trades off that. And I think that's sort of something we need to think about in light of Melissa's comment about time. There is room for sophistication, there's room for complexity. And in many of our art forms outside of the academy and outside of institutions, there is a sense of, you know, of skill and sophistication and intelligence needed of a different kind. And I think the most important factor that ties all those things together is whether you have enough time to commit to either participating in those things or to understanding. Because even the kind of the act of viewership, the act of interpreting art is something that requires time. You know, if we were just going to have like just some crappy schlocky whatever that just the people can just flick through like some whatever blockbuster without properly engaging the kind of stakes of what culture means to our society, you know, we can have so much of that, and we can have artists paid for that as well. But I think our society is the poorer for it. So we want to be able to make sure that the conversation stretches wider beyond just the arts, to think about how workers and people in general can have the means and the time to engage with the arts as makers, as participants, you know, people in the discourse in the, you know, whatever way they can and they wish to. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I do think about the huge amount of money we spend on, you know, art galleries, cultural institutions, and I can't help but think that the opening hours are directly with, and it's a class issue, who's going to be able to go from 9 to 5 or 9 to 4 if you're working, and then we're surprised that we don't have visitor numbers. And of course, everything's tied back to class. And I think, you know, there's this fear of dumbing down art or making it populist, but I think about Bell Hooks, who recently passed away, and she made a shift from reading the classics with her students to Hollywood blockbusters, but at no point did they become less complex.
No,
at no point did they speak less about the society, but they engaged, you know, they engaged your students to have those deeper conversations. So, and there was also another thread that you raised, Tendai, and it's about the art school moving into the academy, and the academy won, I feel, in terms of what we value and fitting in within systems that already existed within the academy. And I think I've been, you know, working with Lissy and Rudy Robinson Cole, and they have this thing about joy, and I was sort of taken back at first, but I'm like, why does art education have to be this kind of horrendous thing where people cry in crits and stress out and don't feel engaged? And it's like, actually, it could be one of the most joyous times in someone's life. And I know that people talk about this idea of creativity and play, but I don't feel that they're really being honored in the way that they could. Like, I think people are afraid of dumbing down and afraid of what, you know, creativity might actually look like in an art school, in a space like that. But Melissa, I hear you having a comment. Did I hear your voice?
Yeah, so you just reminded me of the story I like to tell of when I was teaching at EIT, and there was all these students in the pre-foundation course who had been told, who had been on the benefit, who'd been told to go to art school as part of their, you know, transition into education, because they were good at drawing. And they were really good at drawing, really good heavy metal record covers. Beautiful, beautiful. And art school was killing them. It was killing their joy in arts. It was killing their belief that they could be creative, because it wasn't about that. It wasn't about that. And the teaching, and I was too young a teacher to be able to do this myself, in the sense of my growth as a person, to actually recognize that there were ways to support what they wanted to do and still grow their creative practice. Instead, we basically kind of slammed them with 20th century theory and told them that heavy metal covers sucked.
Yeah, it's like that moment in The Wire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, you know, you realize that, yeah, you are responsible for promulgating a particular ideology about arts. And when I shifted from working Central City to working as a community arts broker, there was this kind of out west, there was this kind of wonderful moment of relief where I realized that there were multiple different art worlds I could work with. And there were multiple different ideas of what was actually a successful creative project, and that you could negotiate what was success with each project and support it to happen. And that is something really beautiful that I think the council's money has been able to enable. And so you look at it, you go, yes, there's these moments where public money can be so emancipatory for people. But then there's also an enormous number of institutional structures. And for some of us, it's incredibly meaningful to succeed within those specific institutional structures. So it really is always kind of asking that question when we start talking about what is success, or what is uplifting people, is in which art world, in which context, what does that look like? And I think it is so wonderfully broad.
Well put. Thank you, Melissa. Nina, do you have any questions that you would like to share?
Got it. Yeah, so one question that jumped out at me from Robin Gibson was, should funding processes be more collaborative? So I'll just find the specific one. Should there be a more collaborative approach to funding bodies and organisations? And could Creative New Zealand be more supportive of mid-range artists and show general openness in regard to funding these? I think these questions speak to some of the themes that have been coming up in this conversation.
It came up in the in the first panel discussion as well, that artists who have very little experience in putting a proposal together and putting it forward through the processes that CNZ or anyone have, it's completely foreign to them. And just through the translation, or the inability to translate what they want to do into the language that the institution requires, was inhibiting a lot of makers in putting forward funding. So I think that that collaborative idea that someone like CNZ would collaborate on putting that together and putting it forward is a very strong one. And to their credit, CNZ do have the people that I know who have contacted them have been talked through things well, but I think that could be done more or more formally. It could actually be set up so that you can hit a button and say, look, I'm going to need some help with this one.
And interestingly, and I think it's actually kind of quite disappointing that hasn't been able to be rolled out as they planned. The Ministry of Culture and Heritage, when they rolled out their innovation funding, attempted to be responsive to this criticism that we didn't want yet another form-filling kind of thing. And they were like, we'll do it as a hackathon. We'll do it as a bring all the groups together with with mentors, and you kind of like collaborate and kind of have that wonderful in-person hui that Tendai you were saying you couldn't have. And then pitch. And so, yeah, there was a little bit of kind of still competitive pitching, sort of, and there's some inherent problems in that. And then they just couldn't do these in person beyond the first ones. And there has also been a number of criticisms about the outcomes and of this funding. So I guess what I'm saying, what's disappointing is they never got to roll the experiment out entirely and see what that did. And because there are other kinds of small community fundings where they do kind of community voting on what gets funded. There's all sorts of different kind of models that people are trying, but I think the organizations are kind of constantly going, it's public money, there has to be an accountability process. We have to be able to explain what was funded, why it was funded, and what it went to, because it is public money. It is 0.0001 cent of our tax in return, but yeah, how do we have accountability in a way that is actually enabling for people?
Absolutely. And I mean, for me, just to put it quite crudely, is that there is a certain obscenity to the idea of people with six-figure salaries in those institutions when artists are really struggling to live. Like when you mentioned the word upheaval, Melissa, I thought that was really the word that I was looking for, as opposed to an interval and interregnum. Is like what we need to see is a moment in which people stand up and say, this won't do, right? This is not the future that we want to imagine for ourselves, or at least there's going to need to be a great level of transparency to account for why we have such a twisted Byzantine-like system of application processes for people to get very little money that they can barely get by on. And I thought about this when I moved back from the UK about a year ago, because there had been some strike action at Tate after the redundancies, hundreds of redundancies, and there were questions being asked of why senior management was getting paid the money they were getting paid, when so many of the lower paid staff were, just essentially getting thrown under the bus. And one of the significant questions we need to ask ourselves for an art world or a culture sector that's become hip to the diversity game is, how diverse our art's going to be? How many disabled people, how many trans people, how many queer people of color are you going to get if they can't make a living from their work, if they don't get the dignity and the remuneration that they deserve, right? So you're going to pick, a few cherry-picked, select middle-class Black, brown people and so on that are going to be there, that are going to hopefully try and placate some people. But that's not a structural shift. That's not what we need to see. And I think the time has come when it's like, it's going to be very, it's going to be unlivable, really, after this pandemic. And it is already now. I think the circumstances are already quite dire for a lot of people. And I know I hate to think of what they're having to go through in order to just survive when things were already bad before this. So I think we need that upheaval. We need our voices to be heard and taken seriously.
I think that's the mic drop moment. Tendai, thank you so much. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Our time is up, and
Can I add something just to that?
Oh, please. Sorry, Jasmine. Yeah.
It's all good. No, I think what you were talking about is really relevant, is like someone from the other side of the I guess applications, and like I speak from privilege, going through art institutions and knowing how like these languages work. And I think with CrossCrits, I'm kind of like we're trying to build a space that filters these languages down to like, the community, which is cool. But in terms of like solution-based models, because we're doing an initiative that's based around like mentoring, which is really cool. And I think for the question, I guess like a mentoring for having like applications or like writing applications or workshops, I think that's one thing that came to mind that we're trying to build in CrossCrits that could go forward to like modeling something that bridges like organizations as well as ground level community artwork artists. But yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great work, Jasmine.
I feel like these panel discussions are always a starting point. And I hope that some of these threads go into the audience and out of our echo chamber tonight and stimulate more conversations in the community. I want to thank all the panelists for lending their rich minds to this topic. I really value your input. I've been startled and impressed. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to thank Amy Saunders and Nina Dyer for your hard work in organizing this, the Auckland Arts Festival, and the sponsor Xero. I'll end with a karakia. Kawahe atu tātou, I raro e te rangamarie, te harikoa, me te manawanui, humie, huie, taikie. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ka kite.
Mihi nui.
Ka kite anō.